Good morning. I am Molly Brinkerhoff, today's worship associate. Welcome to this gray December morning. But it is a good day to be together, if not in person, at least virtually. And hope is on the horizon. This service is brought to you by Reverend Kevin Carson, Drew White, and myself from the church sanctuary. Again, welcome, whether you are a longtime attendee to the church or this is your first time. We have quite a few weekly announcements today, so please bear with me. First, if you are able, please sign in on the chat box to the right of your screen. This will let us know who is joining us. We will be having joys, concerns, and sorrows today, and if you didn't email them earlier, please put them in the chat box now so that a candle can be lit for you at the appropriate time. And please indicate if it is a sorrow, a concern, or a joy. It has been noted that new people have been joining us for our live Sunday service. If you are new and would like to get on our email newsletter, please call the church administrative office and leave a message with your email address. If you would like to talk to someone about the church, again, please contact our office. We are so glad you are joining us. The worship team is still looking for holiday pictures from you, the congregation. Please send us any pictures of you and or your family celebrating the holidays. It will help keep us all connected. While we no longer have an offertory time during the service, it is still important nonetheless. To maintain this free church, we need everyone to fulfill this year's pledges if you haven't already. We also would greatly receive any other donations to support us. Just go to our website to click on the Give button. Thank you. Also, if you haven't already done this, please be sure to send in your pledge cards for our next church year. It really helps the board plan out how our next year will go. And then lastly, be sure to stay for our virtual coffee hour after the service by clicking the link in the email. We will now move into the sacred time of worship. To breathe is to take in air, oxygen into the lungs and expel it. Inhale, exhale. To breathe is to pause and move air gently. Breath allows us to rest and recover. When we deprive our breath by holding it, we tire and become exhausted. To breathe freely provides relief from anxiety, tension, and pressure. So breathe easily. Inhale and exhale as I ring the peace bowl 3 times. Let go of the anxiety, tension, and pressure. We will begin our service with our prelude. Our church covenant was decided upon by a group of members from this congregation. Our covenant, along with our 7 Unitarian Universalist principles, is our guide to how our congregation will relate to each other and to how we will relate to each other and the world. Even though we cannot be together physically, I believe it is still important that we read our covenant together. So as I read our church covenant for us all, please recite it from home with me. Love is the spirit of this community and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will now be lighting our chalice. If you have a candle or a chalice available, please light yours with us. Gary Zukav wrote, "The winter solstice has always been special as a barren darkness that gives birth to a verdant future beyond imagination. A time of pain and withdrawal that produces something joyfully inconceivable, like a monarch butterfly masterfully extracting itself from the confines of its cocoon, bursting forth into unexpected glory. Our Unitarian Universalist chalice flame too also helps light the way from dark to light and helps us each move towards hope as the daylight continues to increase."
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is the poem "The Shortest Day" by Susan Cooper. So the shortest day came and the year died, and everywhere down the centuries of the snow-white world came people singing, dancing, to drive the dark away. They lighted candles in the winter trees. They hung their homes with evergreen. They burned beseeching fires all night long to keep the year alive. And when the New Year's sunshine blazed awake, they shouted, reveling. Through all the frosty ages you can hear them echoing behind us. Listen. All the long echoes sing the same delight. This shortest day, as promise, wakens in the sleeping land. They carol, feast, give thanks, and dearly love their friends and hope for peace. And so do we here, now. The year, this year, and every year. Welcome, Yule. I invite you to join in our opening hymn, number 42, Morning So Fair to See.
A Solstice Story by Jeff Della Penna. In the beginning, the sun pedaled straight across the sky each and every day from east to west, never ever varying the route. True as the most perfect wheel, she never deviated from that course and circled the earth on the same fine line each and every lap. But after years and years of constant service, the sun's trusty bicycle was in dire need of repair. So each night the sun would try to repair the bicycle, and each morning the sun would rise a little later and a little later. And rising later, the sun would take a shorter route across the sky, further to the south, so as to finish sooner, and thus be able to resume work on the bicycle. Each night the work would become more and more involved, and each morning the sun would rise later and later. Without the full warmth of the sun, the mountains began to grow cold, and rain turned to snow, and all the people began to panic and worry for the sun, and they called to the sun, "Don't leave us!" But the sun was busy trying to repair her bicycle and find those parts that were needed, and each day she rose later and later and took a route that was further and further to the south. Finally, on a day so short that it hardly started at all, a bicycle mechanic came forth and rose to the south to meet the sun and repaired the bicycle as it needed. The mechanic worked throughout the long night, and in the morning the sun rose again late, but not as late as the morning before. Now the sun was out of shape, and so each morning she rose a little earlier, and stayed in the sky a little longer, and moved slowly back up to the brightest line in the sky. And so it is that each summer the sun burns across the sky brightly and warms the earth and all those who welcome it. And in the fall the sun begins to drop off in search of the mechanic, and finally finds the mechanic on the day now known as the winter solstice. From that first winter solstice, riders who love the warmth of the sun and the light that it brings ride out into the night on the eve of the solstice with lights on their bikes and offerings of spare parts and tools. And on the morning of the solstice, true believers bring gifts and salutations to their local bicycle shop in honor of the mechanic who fixes the bicycle of the sun and sends the sun back into the sky each winter. The end.
For years, the sharing of joys, concerns, and sorrows has been our enduring ritual. It is a time in our congregation where each of us has an opportunity to share major events in our lives so that we can all be uplifted by our Unitarian Universalist community. As I read the joys, concerns, or sorrows that were emailed to us and put in the chat box, Reverend Kevin will light a candle. The first joy I have is actually my own. My son William's significant other, Nicole, got the vaccine shot this week because she is an essential worker at a hospital in New York. Very excited about that. Reverend Kevin has a joy. He is very joyful that Biden, and by the announcements of Biden's excellent environmental team. It gives us so much hope for the future. Amanda and Drew have a joy that their nephew Max celebrated his first year, and they did it all on Zoom, and that includes his grandparents, Cindy and Robert Logan. We have a joy from the Millers. Let me find it on here real quick. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. They have a joy. A good friend of theirs had a successful open heart surgery on Tuesday to repair a congenital heart defect. She is home and doing well. We are thankful for that. And then from Karen Shropshire, she has a joy that two COVID vaccines are available. There is light at the end of this dark tunnel. And then Victoria McDonald has a concern to enable our nation to successfully deal with the hack of our nation's infrastructure in an honest, transparent manner. Larry and Nancy Frank have a joy. Thank you, Reverend Kevin, for the comforting Vespers service. And then we have one more joy. Yes, we have one more joy. It comes from Judy Stanley and comes from the super nice Vesper service a few days ago. An amazing photo display from Molly and Tom. And today is my daughter's birthday. Well, happy birthday to your daughter, Judy. Any other ones? Did I miss anything? Okay. So, and then we light one additional candle for everyone, for all those joys and concerns and sorrows we hold in our hearts and are unable to share today. Stay healthy and strong, members and friends. Our UU community lifts up its love for each and every one of you.
Our reading this morning is an excerpt from the book The Circle of Life by Joyce Rupp and Macrina Wiederkehr. There's a tendency to want to hurry from autumn to spring, to avoid the long, dark days that winter brings. Many people do not like constant days bereft of light and months filled with colder temperatures. They struggle with the bleakness of land and the emptiness of trees. Their eyes and hearts seek color. Their spirits tire of tasting the endless gray skies. There's great rejoicing in the thought that light and warmth will soon be filling more and more of each new day. But winter darkness has a positive side to it. As we gather to celebrate the first turn from winter to spring, we are invited to recognize and honor the beauty in the often unwanted season of winter. Let us invite our hearts to be glad for the courage winter proclaims. Let us be grateful for the wisdom winter brings in teaching us about the need for withdrawal as an essential part of renewal. Let us also encourage our spirits as earth prepares to come forth from this time of withdrawal into a season of filled with light. The winter solstice celebrates the return of hope to our land as our planet experiences the first slow turn toward greater daylight. Soon, we will welcome the return of the sun and the coming of springtime. As we do, let us remember and embrace the positive, enriching aspects of winter's darkness. I invite you to join in our next hymn, number 226, People Look East. Here in the northern hemisphere, tomorrow morning at 3:02 a.m. local time is the winter solstice, the moment in the Earth's annual revolution around the sun that marks the maximum tilt of the Earth's axis away from the sun, bringing the shortest day and the longest night of the year. If we lived at the North Pole, it would be a time of constant darkness and twilight, with the sun never appearing in the sky. But since we are a little over halfway to the equator here in Idaho Falls, we are blessed with about 9 hours of sunlight at this time of year. Immediately after 3:02 tomorrow morning, the days will slowly grow longer until they reach a maximum in the summer solstice in June. And then the cycle of decreasing daylight will begin again, as it has for billions of years. Assuming the Earth avoids some other planet-killing event, we should continue this trip around the sun for at least another 7 or 8 billion years, until the sun's nuclear furnace begins to run out of hydrogen fuel, and it expands enormously in diameter, engulfing the inner planets, which may include the Earth. And even if our planet is not swallowed up by the sun, it will likely be thrown into a spiraling orbit that will eject us from the solar system. Either way, we can be certain that the Earth faces an inevitable death, just like each of us. The sun giveth, and the sun taketh away. Were it not for our sun, there would be no solar system, of course, including the Earth, nor would we enjoy the energy that makes life possible. Even at an average distance of about 92 million miles away from us, and despite the attenuation of Earth's magnetic field that protects us from a solar wind of charged particles, and the stratospheric ozone layer that prevents much of the sun's harmful ultraviolet light from reaching the Earth's surface, we are bathed in a constant flow of energy from the sun, as long as we are on the daylight side of Earth's rotation. On a clear day, that energy is about 1,000 watts per square meter on the Earth's surface. Solar energy that is, practically speaking, nearly inexhaustible. And though we do benefit somewhat from the solar energy we absorb directly, too much can be harmful, and we have no biological means of using the rest. We can lay in the sunshine all day, but we can't produce a drop of food to sustain our bodies. Since we have yet to evolve the capacity for photosynthesis, and probably never will. Instead, we must either eat plants that can transmute sunlight, soil, and water into food, or eat animals that have already eaten those plants. Without the constant supply of solar energy, life on Earth would quickly perish. I could keep naming the reasons we should be thankful for the sun, but on this eve of the winter solstice, let us simply acknowledge that our sun is extremely important, and human beings have felt this special relationship with the Earth's star long before we began to know anything scientific about it. It is easy to imagine that as soon as our human ancestors evolved the capacity for curiosity, they looked up at the sky and began to wonder about the sun, the moon, and the stars, feeling the first stirrings of awe and wonder that would lead to the earliest expressions of religion. I suspect it goes back for millions of years, but we can only speculate. There is debatable archaeological evidence of religion in the form of intentional burials as early as 200,000 years ago. But from later cave paintings and other objects, it is at least safe to say that members of our genus, Homo, have been having spiritual feelings for tens of thousands of years. Observations of nature was crucial to survival, of course, noting the seasonal behaviors of animals they hunted, and knowing when to gather the various edible plants. and witnessing the force of nature in sometimes terrifying splendor surely evoked feelings of something beyond human control and understanding. As our ancient ancestors began to migrate out of Africa, farther from the equator, the seasonal variations in daylight would be plainly obvious, as would the changing temperatures and weather patterns. And after the development of agriculture about 12,000 years ago, knowing when to plant crops and when to expect the harvest became even more critical. Being keen observers of the heavens, our ancestors soon developed ceremonial sites and structures to track the journey of the sun throughout the year. For example, there's evidence of worship at the Göbekli Tepe archaeological site in Turkey as early as 11,000 years ago. And by about 5,000 years ago, the first complex at Stonehenge was built, along with the first passage tombs in Ireland that aligned with the sun at dawn on the winter solstice. It is not hard to imagine that the growing darkness and rebirth of the sun would become associated with human death and possible rebirth. It is also easy to appreciate how the sun became deified in so many cultures as religious imaginations flourished. With its blinding radiance and round shape, the sun was often imagined as a divine or all-seeing eye. Such was its association with the Greek god Zeus, the Egyptian god Horus, the Vedic sky god Varuna, the Norse god Odin, and even Allah in Islam, just to name a few. Sometimes the sun and moon were imagined to be a good and evil pair of eyes. Another common archetype is that the sun was one of two eyes from a god who plucked it out and placed it in the heavens for our benefit. Even more frequently in cultures throughout the world, the sun was worshipped as a deity in its own right, and it was most often associated with male attributes, with some notable exceptions. It was Shamash for the Babylonians, Ra for the Egyptians, Mithras for the Persians, and Apollo for the Greeks and Romans. The sun was the Japanese goddess Amaterasu, believed to be the ancestor of the imperial family. And the rising sun became the symbol of the Japanese people and even the name of their country, Nihon. And as a symbol, the sun was also associated with the Chinese emperor and the Buddha. Basically, at every corner of the earth, and in most every culture until modern times, the sun became deified, or at least became an important sacred symbol. Even in the early Christian times, the popular Roman sun god, Sol Invictus, which means the invincible sun, was still appearing on Roman coins and even became associated with Jesus Christ, who was sometimes given that epithet or called Sol Justitiae, the son of justice. If you want to see how Romans depicted Sol Invictus, look no further than our own Statue of Liberty. The head crowned with points representing the sun's rays has been the traditional symbolism for Sol Invictus for centuries. Celebrating the annual solar festivals became a natural way to honor the sun and mark the changing seasons. With the winter and summer solstice, along with the fall and spring equinoxes, becoming the most significant times of the year. Other times were celebrated between those four main events, but the solstices were the most important holidays of the solar calendar. Among the Germanic tribes of Northern Europe, the winter solstice became known as Yule, and many of the seasonal rituals we practice today come out of the Yule tradition, including the practice of bringing mistletoe, evergreen boughs, and trees into our homes as decorations to remind us of life in the middle of the cold, dark winter. While many pre-Christian rituals fell out of practice over the centuries, sometimes by force, some Christian missionaries were savvy enough to realize they could gain more converts by reimagining time-honored pagan traditions overlaying some Christian association. The most obvious example is associating the birth of Jesus with the time around the winter solstice. December 25th was selected by Roman Christians to coincide with the pagan Saturnalia winter holiday, which was celebrated from December 17th through the 25th. And as Christianity moved north into the Germanic regions, Yule and Christmas became intentionally connected. There are records, for example, from the saga of Håkon the Good, which credits King Håkon I of Norway, who ruled from 934 to 961, both with the Christianization of Norway and the linking of Yule and Christmas holidays. There are no records, of course, to tell us when Jesus was actually born, but with Jesus envisioned as the light of the world, it is easy to create an association with the solstice holiday and the return of the sun. What strikes me about the rituals of Yule is the emphasis on nature and being outside, building bonfires, wassailing through the apple orchards by torchlight, singing songs, and pouring cider libations at the foot of the trees in hopes of a good harvest in the coming year, and so on. Indeed, as I was writing the sermon, it felt a little off to be describing such rituals in words rather than feeling them viscerally through experience outside. That is how Yule is really meant to be celebrated. Though the decorations and feasts in our homes is certainly part of the holiday. Maybe when COVID is relegated to the history books, we should all go a wassailing or build some bonfires. Most of us probably do not deify the sun per se, but we can still honor the spirit of the season as one of the natural holidays of the cycle of life. I ran across an article online the other day by Nina Farrell on the sunset.com website with 8 ritual suggestions for celebrating the winter solstice in your home. And I thought it would be nice to share them. Build a Yule altar with candles and natural symbols of the winter, such as pine cones and evergreen sprigs, perhaps even a symbolic Yule log. Make an evergreen Yule wreath. And I would suggest making an edible wreath for birds, if you are so inclined. Burn a Yule log. In ancient times, the Nordic tradition often meant burning an entire tree in your fireplace for days. But a good solid log that can burn all night would be nice. Marty and I have done this in the past, and we would keep a small unburnt piece of the log until the next solstice to help light the new Yule log. Decorate a Yule tree. I'm guessing this needs no further explanation. Exchange nature-based gifts. She suggests a handmade wreath, a plant-based candle, or seeds. Give back to nature. Scatter seeds for the birds, or donate to some organization. Celebrate in candlelight. Light some candles and turn off the electric lights to better appreciate the gift of light. And finally, set up a meditation space and take some time to relax and renew. As our reading suggested, let winter teach us about the essential need for withdrawal in nurturing our spirits. I think all of these are great ideas, and we could probably come up with many more. Finding ways to celebrate any holiday right now is so difficult. And when we were forced to remain isolated and apart from family and friends to remain safe, it is especially so. But the winter solstice reminds us that the light will return, no matter how dark it seems. The sun will continue to pour out its life-giving energy upon the earth, whether we deserve it or not. And we should be grateful for this abundance. On a final note, when I think about the sun and celebrating the winter solstice, I'm reminded of what the English theologian Don Cupid calls solar ethics. He suggests that a good way to be religious in a postmodern world is to imitate the sun's radiance in our own life. He writes, quote, "I am giving as far as I can towards simply equating the ethical with life's own spontaneous and joyful affirmation of itself, life's solar outpouring. The purest affirmation of life is also a thoroughgoing acceptance of transience," end quote. In other words, just as the sun pours out its energy in all directions, speeding inevitably toward the natural end of its existence, we too should pour out what love and energy we can offer the world as an affirmation of life, even knowing that we also face an inevitable death. So let us be like the sun in this bleak midwinter, offering our own light into the world however we can. And let us never forget our relationship with the sun and the earth, remembering, as Carl Sagan said, that we are all made of star stuff, atoms forged in the fiery furnaces of ancient stars, coalesced into the solar system, and now residing in our very bodies. Let us also give thanks for the plants as they bask in the sun's radiance and photosynthesize the food that allows us to live. Hail to the sun, Sol Invictus, and happy Yule to all. Our closing hymn is number 235, Deck the Hall with Boughs of Holly. Our closing words are from Nancy Wood. It is our quiet time. We do not speak because the voices are within us. It is our quiet time. We do not walk because the earth is all within us. It is our quiet time. We do not dance because the music has lifted us to a place where the Spirit is. It is our quiet time. We rest with all of nature. We wake when the seven sisters wake. We greet them in the sky over the opening of the kiva.
We will now extinguish our chalice with the following words, and please join me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please join us after the prelude for the virtual coffee hour.